Episode 1, The House is Always Waiting. The house that chose its owner. The house had been on the market for years. No one wanted it. It wasn't haunted, at least, not in the way people think. No flickering lights. No cold drafts. No distant whispers in the night. It was just wrong. Every family who moved in left within a month. No explanations. No complaints. They just vanished from town, as if they had never been there at all. And now, the house had chosen a new owner. To the man who didn't believe in ghost stories, Ethan Monroe had always wanted a house of his own. He was tired of renting cheap apartments, of hearing neighbors arguing through thin walls, of living in a space that never truly belonged to him. So when he found a massive Victorian home listed at an impossibly low price, he thought it was too good to be true. It had heavy checkmark hardwood floors. Heavy checkmark a beautiful wraparound porch. Heavy checkmark a history no one would talk about. But Ethan wasn't superstitious. The house was real. The price was real. The keys were real. So he signed the contract. And that night, the house locked its doors behind him. 3. The picture that shouldn't exist. The first few days were uneventful. No ghosts. No mysterious noises. No flickering lights. Ethan felt lucky. But on the third night, he found the picture. It was hanging in the hallway, near the staircase. A framed black and white photo of a man standing on the front porch. Something about the image unsettled him. It took him a full minute before he realized why. The man in the picture was him. Same face. Same clothes. But Ethan had never taken this photo. And it looked like it had been there for decades. For the house doesn't like to be ignored. Ethan took the picture down. But the next morning it was back on the wall. And this time, there was another person in the photo. A figure standing in the window, behind him. Watching. Waiting. And then, as he stared, the frame cracked down the middle. The house that knows your name. At 3:17 a.m., Ethan woke up to his phone ringing. The screen glowed with an incoming call. Caller ID, home. His stomach dropped. He hadn't set up a landline. And he was alone in the house. The phone kept ringing. Finally, he answered. Hello. Silence. And then a whisper. Welcome home, Ethan. And then the line went dead. 6. The doors that never stay closed. Ethan locked every door before going to bed. But every morning, they were wide open. He started barricading them. Still, they unlocked themselves. And then, one night, he heard footsteps in the hallway. Heavy. Slow. But no one was there. Just the old wooden floorboards creaking under invisible weight. And then the bedroom door handle started to turn. 7. The thing that watched from the stairs. Ethan refused to leave. He wasn't going to be scared out of his own house. But the house had other plans. That night, he woke up to a noise outside his window. A shadow moved on the porch. For a moment, he thought it was his own reflection in the glass. But then it stepped forward. And smiled. You don't belong here. And then it was gone. 8. The house that never lets go. The next morning, Ethan tried to leave. But when he opened the front door, he was standing in the kitchen. Like he had never left at all. He tried again. This time, he stepped onto the porch and walked right back into the house. He was trapped. The house wouldn't let him go. And in the hallway, the picture on the wall had changed again. Now, it showed a man standing behind Ethan. His face was blurred. But his hand was on Ethan's shoulder. And in the space where his eyes should have been, there was only darkness. Episode 2, The Doors Never Stay Closed. The house that unlocks itself. Ethan didn't leave. Because he couldn't. He had tried everything. Heavy check mark walking out the front door only to step back inside. Heavy check mark climbing out the window and waking up in his bed. Heavy check mark calling for help but his phone never had service. The house was alive. And it wanted him to stay. To the doors that opened by themselves at first, it was just the front door. Every morning, Ethan woke up to find it wide open. Then, it was the back door. Then, the basement. Then, every door in the house. All unlocked. All open. As if the house was inviting something inside. 3. The locks that don't matter. Ethan boarded them shut. Nailed the windows closed. Pushed furniture against the doors. And still at exactly 3:17 a.m., every door in the house clicked open. One by one. From the bedroom. To the kitchen. To the basement. And somewhere, in the dark something moved. 4. The footsteps that didn't belong to him. Ethan tried to stay calm. There was an explanation for this. There had to be. But then he heard the footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. Moving through the house. And they were getting closer. The first time he saw it he waited. Heart pounding. Breath shallow. And then he saw it. A shadow. Standing at the end of the hallway. Watching him. Still. Silent. Until it tilted its head. And then, in a voice that sounded too much like his own, it whispered, "You need to let me in." 6. The night the doors locked themselves, Ethan ran. He grabbed his phone. His keys. But when he reached the front door it was locked. He turned. The windows were locked. The back door was locked. The house had changed the rules. Now, it wasn't trying to let something in. It was trying to keep him inside. 7. The basement that shouldn't exist. That night, he dreamed of a door that didn't exist before. And when he woke up it was real. A small, wooden door at the back of the house. It led downward. To a place that wasn't on the house's blueprints. And inside. He could hear something breathing. 8. The house that whispers in the dark. Ethan didn't go down. Not at first. But the house didn't give him a choice. At 3:17 a.m., the whispers started. "Come see what's waiting for you." The voice came from the basement door. Soft. Gentle. His voice. And then, the door swung open by itself. 9. The thing that wanted a body. Ethan stepped forward. The air was thick, heavy. And then he saw it. Standing at the bottom of the stairs. A figure. It had his shape. His height. His face. But the eyes were wrong. Too empty. Too black. And then it whispered, "I need you to switch places with me." The house that doesn't let go. Ethan ran. He slammed the basement door shut. Locked it. Pushed a dresser in front of it. And then, in the silence the doorknob slowly turned. From the other side. Click. 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 And then a whisper. "I'm already inside." And when Ethan turned around it was standing behind him. Smiling. Waiting. And then everything went dark. Episode 3, The Voices in the Van Site. The house that breathed. The house never slept. Even in the silence of the night, it breathed. The air vents exhaled soft whispers. The wooden floors creaked as if someone was walking, even when Ethan was alone. Except he was never alone. Not really. To the first whisper it started on the 5th night. A sound, drifting through the air vents. Soft. Almost too faint to hear. At first, Ethan thought it was the wind. But then he listened closer. And heard his own name. Ethan. His blood ran cold. 3. The recording that shouldn't exist. Ethan was a man of logic. So he set up his phone recorder near the air vent before bed. He needed proof that it was just his imagination. The next morning, He played the audio back. And what he heard wasn't the wind. It was a conversation. Between two voices. For the voices that knew him, Ethan pressed play. Static. Then a soft, distorted voice, he doesn't know yet. A pause. Then, a second voice, softer. He will soon. Ethan's stomach twisted. The voices weren't his. But they were talking about him. The vents that led somewhere else. Ethan tried to ignore it. He told himself it was old wiring, a glitch, a leftover recording. But then one night, he woke up to a scraping sound. Like nails dragging inside the vents. He grabbed a flashlight. Pulled off the vent cover. And shined the light inside. The tunnel stretched far too deep. Deeper than the house should allow. And at the end of it he saw eyes staring back at him. 6. The whisper that came from inside the room. Ethan fell backward. Heart racing. He slammed the vent shut. But before he could move, a breath curled around his ear. From behind him. A whisper. I told you not to look. 7. The house that wants to speak. Ethan started hearing voices everywhere. The pipes. The radio. The static on the TV. At first, it was just whispers. Then they started calling his name. Ethan, come closer. We need to show you something. And then, one night the voices started laughing. Soft. Gentle. Like they were waiting. 8. The hidden room. Ethan needed answers. He searched the house, top to bottom. And then, behind a bookshelf in the study, he found a door. It wasn't in the house's blueprints. It had no handle. No keyhole. And from the other side he heard breathing. Not his. Something deeper. And then, from inside the walls, a whisper, you're almost ready. 9. The thing in the vents. That night, Ethan set up a camera. Pointed it toward the air vent. He needed to know what was watching him. At 3:17 a.m., the footage caught something moving inside. Not a rat. Not a shadow. A hand. Reaching. Pale, too long, with fingers that dragged against the metal. And then it waved at the camera. The house that never lets go. Ethan tried to leave. But when he opened the front door, he was standing in the basement. Like he had never left at all. The whispers were louder now. They were all around him. And then from the darkness, a voice that sounded exactly like his own whispered, come inside. And before he could scream, the door slammed shut behind him. Episode 4, The House Knows Your Name. The call that shouldn't exist. The phone rang at exactly 3:17 a.m. Ethan's eyes snapped open. The glow of his phone screen cast long shadows on the ceiling. Telephone receiver. Incoming call. Home. His stomach twisted. He hadn't set up a landline. He hadn't given his number to anyone. And yet the call kept ringing. His hand shook as he pressed answer. Silence. Then a whisper. Ethan. The voice was his own. To the house that speaks back. Ethan hung up. His pulse pounded in his ears. The moment his thumb left the screen, the phone rang again. Telephone receiver. Incoming call. Home. A part of him knew he shouldn't answer. But something wanted him to. Something was waiting. And when he finally picked up, the whisper returned. Why are you ignoring me? Ethan's breath hitched. His own voice spoke from the other end. You have to let me in. Then the call ended. And outside his bedroom door, a soft knock. 3. The door that shouldn't open. Ethan froze. The knock came again. Slow. Rhythmic. Like whoever was outside wasn't in a hurry. He grabbed a baseball bat from beside his bed. Stepped forward. And pulled open the door. Nothing. Just the dark hallway stretching before him. And at the end of it, the front door was wide open. For the house that knew too much. Ethan checked his phone. No call history. No missed calls. like it had never happened. But the house had changed. When he walked into the hallway, he saw something new. A framed document hanging on the wall. The house's deed. It had his name on it. Ethan Monroe. Date of ownership, 1947. That wasn't possible. He had bought this house 3 weeks ago. The voices that say your name at sunrise, Ethan tried to rationalize. Maybe it was a prank. A mistake. A bad dream. But then the house spoke again. Not through the phone. Not through the vents. This time it came from the walls. Soft. Whispered. Dozens of voices. And they were all saying his name. Ethan. 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 6. The house that remembers the whispers led him to the basement. To a box he had never seen before. Inside a collection of old photographs. Some were black and white, yellowed at the edges. And in every single one he was there. His face. His clothes. Standing in front of the house. The dates? Years before he was born. 7. The person who looked just like him. Then a final photo. One that wasn't old. One that had been taken yesterday. In it, he was standing in the hallway. Looking directly at the camera. And behind him a shadowy figure, standing just out of focus. Too tall. Too thin. Its hand on his shoulder. 8. The house that never lets go. Ethan tried to run. But the front door was gone. The window sealed shut. The whispers grew louder. You belong here. You've always belonged here. Let us in. And in the reflection of the window he saw himself. But his reflection wasn't following him anymore. It was smiling. Waiting. And then everything went dark. Episode 5, The Shadows Are Wrong. The house that casts two shadows. Ethan had stopped sleeping. He couldn't. Every night, the house changed. Whispers in the vents. Footsteps that weren't his. Doors opening on their own. And then the shadows. That's when he knew he wasn't alone anymore. 2. The first time he noticed it started small. One morning, as Ethan brushed his teeth, he noticed his shadow on the bathroom floor. Nothing unusual. Until he moved. And his shadow didn't. 3. The shadows that stretched on their own. At first, he told himself it was a trick of the light. But then he noticed more. His shadow lingering a second too long when he turned away. Growing longer even when the light didn't move. And worst of all, splitting. One night, as he walked past the hallway mirror, his shadow stretched in 2 different directions. And then one of them moved on its own. 4. The shadows that follow. At 3:17 a.m., Ethan woke up freezing. Something felt wrong. He sat up. And saw it. A shadow at the foot of his bed. Not cast by anything. Just standing there. Watching. And then it tilted its head. And whispered. You're not supposed to be here. The room that wasn't there before. Ethan refused to stay another night. He grabbed his keys. His phone. He ran down the hallway. But when he reached the front door, it was gone. Replaced by a new door. One that had never been there before. His stomach dropped. The house had changed again. 6. The shadow that stepped out of the wall. The door swung open. Ethan backed away. Inside was pure darkness. And then something stepped out. A shadow. Not his. Not anyone's. But it had his shape. His height. His voice. You need to let me in. 7. The house that wants a body. Ethan slammed the door shut. Ran back to his bedroom. But when he turned, his shadow was waiting for him. Except now it wasn't just a shadow. It was standing. Moving. And then it smiled. You're standing where I'm supposed to be. 8. The switch. Ethan grabbed his phone. Took a picture. and what he saw in the reflection was himself. But he wasn't holding the phone. His shadow was. And then, as he watched, the screen flickered, and Ethan saw himself from the other side of the glass, looking out. Trapped. And then everything went dark. Episode 6, The Mirror That Shows the Future. The house that changes its reflection. Ethan had stopped trusting mirrors. He avoided them. Turned them away. Because every time he looked, something was wrong. The first time he noticed, it happened in the bathroom. A normal morning. Until his reflection blinked too late. Just a second behind him. Like it was watching. Like it was learning. The future that shouldn't exist. At first, he thought it was his imagination. But then, he saw it again. At 3:17 a.m. He walked past the hallway mirror, and in the reflection, he wasn't alone. Behind him, a figure. Standing in the doorway. Waiting. Except when he turned around, nothing was there. But in the mirror, the figure stepped closer. 4. The mirror that wants to show you. Ethan covered every mirror in the house. But that night the covers were gone. And in the largest mirror, he saw something new. Not just his reflection. A scene. A moment that hadn't happened yet. In it, he was standing at the front door, reaching for the handle. And then a hand grabbed his wrist, pulled him back into the house. And then everything went dark. The house that predicts. Ethan tried to ignore it. But the next night it showed him something worse. This time, it wasn't just him. It was a body. His. Lying at the bottom of the stairs. Mouth open. Eyes wide. And then the reflection turned its head to look at him. And smiled. 6. The reflection that knows you. Ethan tried to break the mirror. But when the glass shattered, the reflection stayed. Still there. Watching him through the broken pieces. And then it spoke. You can't stop this. Ethan ran. But in every reflective surface, the future was waiting for him. 7. The moment that arrived that night, Ethan didn't sleep. He refused to go near the mirror. But at 3:17 a.m., something changed. The house was silent. Too silent. And then the mirror cracked on its own. A single fracture. And in the reflection he saw himself. Standing at the front door. Just like in the vision. 8. The house that follows its own rules. Ethan knew what was coming. He had seen it. But could he stop it? He ran for the door. Grabbed the handle. And then a hand grabbed his wrist. Cold. Too strong. And pulled him back inside. Just like in the mirror. Just like the future had promised. And then everything went dark. Episode 7, You Have Been Here Before. The house that remembers you. Ethan woke up in a cold sweat. His heart was pounding. The dream, if it was a dream, still clung to him. A vision of the house, but different. Familiar. Like he had lived here before. But that was impossible. Right? The first clue, he tried to shake it off. Tried to ignore the feeling of déjà vu that crawled under his skin. But the house wouldn't let him. Because that morning, in the attic, he found a box. An old, dust-covered box. With his name on it. 3. The photos that shouldn't exist inside were photographs. Dozens. All of them old. Faded. Black and white. And in every single one, Ethan was there. Standing in front of the house. Smiling. Except the dates on the back said 1928. 1895, 1843. Long before he was even born. For the VHS tapes at the bottom of the box, he found something else. Old VHS tapes. Labeled with his name. And dates that made no sense. He didn't own a VCR. But the house did. A dusty old player, sitting in the corner of the attic. waiting. As if it knew he would find it. The footage that was impossible. Ethan hesitated. But something compelled him to press play. The screen flickered to life. Static. Then a video of himself. Standing in the hallway. Wearing clothes from another era. Smiling at the camera. And then he spoke. "Ethan, you need to listen." His blood turned to ice. 6. The warning from the past. The Ethan on the screen looked older. Tired. Afraid. You think you just bought this house. You didn't. You've always lived here. And the house won't let you leave. Ethan's hands trembled. This had to be fake. But then the Ethan on the screen leaned in. Looked straight at him. And whispered, "It's watching you right now." And then the TV shut off. 7. The voices in the walls. Ethan's breath was ragged. His pulse thundered in his ears. And then a sound. A low, scratching noise. Coming from inside the walls. Like something trying to get out. The whispers followed. Soft. Echoing. "You have always lived here." Ethan ran. But no matter where he went, the voices followed. 8. The room that doesn't exist. The house was changing again. Doors where they shouldn't be. Hallways that stretched too far. And then a new door. One that hadn't been there before. It was slightly open. Inside, darkness. And the sound of breathing. Ethan swallowed hard. He had to know. 9. The truth in the mirror inside was a single mirror. Old. Cracked. Covered in dust and fingerprints. And when he wiped it clean, the reflection wasn't him. It was another version of him. From another time. And this time, the reflection didn't follow his movements. It just watched. And then, in a voice that was almost his own, it whispered, "You need to take my place." The door slammed shut behind him. And everything went dark. Episode 8, The Missing Room. The door that wasn't there before. Ethan had learned to stop questioning the impossible. Because in this house, reality was optional. Walls shifted. Rooms appeared. And tonight a new door had materialized at the end of the hallway. Slightly open. Waiting for him. To the hallway that stretched too long. He hesitated. Something felt different this time. The air was heavier. The house was expectant. He stepped forward. The wooden floor groaned beneath him. The hallway seemed longer than before. Too long. As if the house was expanding. And the door at the end was getting farther away. 3. The room that shouldn't exist. Finally, he reached it. Pushed it open. Inside, darkness. No furniture. No windows. Just a single chair in the center of the room. And sitting on it a man. His back was turned. His head tilted at an unnatural angle. And as Ethan stepped inside, the man whispered, "I was waiting for you." For the man who looked like him. Ethan's stomach twisted. The voice sounded too familiar. Too much like his own. The man stood up. Turned around. And Ethan's breath caught in his throat. Because the man was him. The reflection that wasn't in the mirror. Ethan stumbled backward. Shaking his head. This wasn't real. It couldn't be. And yet his double just stood there. Watching. Smiling. Like he had been expecting this. And then, in a voice that was his but wasn't, he whispered, "It's your turn now." 6. The house that wants a replacement. Ethan backed toward the door. But the room stretched. The walls pulsed. The exit was too far away. And his other self stepped forward. "I was like you once. I thought I was the first. But this house. It needs someone." Ethan's pulse thundered. "Needs someone for what?" The other Ethan smiled. "To take my place." And then he lunged. 7. The fight to stay real. Ethan dodged. He ran. But the room kept shifting. The walls grew hands. Clawing. Grabbing. Trying to pull him in. His double's voice echoed everywhere. You don't have a choice. The house needs one of us. And I'm done. 8. The trap that was always waiting. Ethan reached for the door. It slammed shut. His double was right behind him, breathing down his neck, whispering, if you don't stay, the house will find someone else. Ethan turned, and his double was gone. But the chair was occupied again. And now, sitting there was him. 9. The switch that can't be stopped. Ethan looked down at his hands. Something was wrong. His skin felt thicker. His arms, heavier. Like he was sinking. Like the house was absorbing him. And from across the room his other self was walking away. Heading toward the door. Free. Leaving him behind. The house that never lets go, Ethan screamed. Fought. But the chair held him in place. And then the wall sealed the door shut. His double was gone. And Ethan was alone. Alone in the room that shouldn't exist. Until the next time the house needed someone new. Until it opened the door again. And then everything went dark. Episode 9, The House Knows When You Lie. The house that watches. Ethan had learned something about the house. It didn't just trap him. It didn't just shift its walls, change its reflections, or whisper in the dark. It was listening. And worst of all, it knew when he was lying. To the first lie, it started with something small. A single, careless lie. That morning, Ethan stood in the kitchen, staring at the rotting fruit bowl. The apples were blackened. The bananas had withered into something unnatural. He muttered to himself, shaking his head, I don't live here. The moment the words left his mouth, the lights flickered. The entire house groaned. Like the walls were reacting. Like the house was correcting him. 3. The cracks in the walls. Ethan tried to ignore it. But that night he found a crack running down his bedroom wall. Thin. Black. Like a deep vein beneath the wallpaper. When he pressed his fingers against it, he heard something breathing on the other side. And then, a whisper. You know that's not true. Ethan yanked his hand away. The crack spread. For the house punishes liars. The next day, Ethan tested it. He stood in front of the mirror and said, clearly and firmly, I can leave anytime I want. The house screamed. The walls shook. The lights burst. And outside the window the trees twisted unnaturally. Like the entire world had recoiled from his words. And then, in the shattered reflection, he saw something behind him. A shadow. Watching. Waiting. The voice that repeats your lies at 3:17 a.m., Ethan woke up to a sound. A voice. His own voice. Whispering from the vent. I can leave anytime I want. Soft. Mocking. Repeating his own words back at him. And then a chuckle. Not his. Something else. Something inside the walls. And then the house spoke back. Lie again. 6. The mirror that shows the truth. Ethan grabbed the mirror from the hallway. He needed to see. To understand. But when he looked, his reflection wasn't his. It was another version of him. One that looked hollow. Like it had been here for too long. And when it opened its mouth it whispered, tell the truth. Ethan backed away. The mirror cracked. And behind him, the whispering grew louder. 7. The house demands the truth. Ethan was trapped. But this wasn't about escape anymore. This was about survival. He had one option left. One final test. He stood in the middle of the room. Took a deep breath. And said, I belong here. Silence. No shaking walls. No flickering lights. The air grew warm. And from the darkness a voice sighed, good. Then everything went dark. Episode 10, The House Decides Who Stays. The house that decides. Ethan had spent weeks trying to leave. He had tried everything. Breaking windows. Ripping the doors off their hinges. Screaming for help until his throat bled. But the house had other plans. And now it was tired of waiting. To the house that gives you a choice. That night, at 3:17 a.m., Ethan woke up to a sound. The house was breathing. Not just the vents. Not just the creaking walls. The entire house. Like it was alive. And then a voice. Soft. Familiar. Ethan, it's time. 3. The door that was never there before. At the end of the hallway, a new door had appeared. Different from the others. Older. Warped wood, with a rusted keyhole. Ethan didn't want to open it. But his feet moved on their own. And as he reached for the handle, the whisper returned. Choose wisely. For the 2 rooms inside. 2 rooms. Identical. Perfectly symmetrical. Except for one detail. In the left room a mirror. In the right room a door. And in between them a single note, resting on the floor. Faded. Crumpled. With one sentence written in shaking ink, only one way leads outside. The reflection that moved on its own. Ethan hesitated. Then he stepped into the left room. The mirror was cracked, but it reflected him perfectly. Almost too perfectly. He lifted his hand. His reflection lifted its hand. Then it kept moving after he stopped. And it smiled. This is not your way out. The whisper came from inside the glass. 6. The door that might be a trick. Ethan turned. Ran to the right room. The door stood in front of him. But the closer he got, the more he saw the marks on the wood. Scratches. Like someone had tried to claw their way back inside. A warning? Or a trap? The house rumbled. Waiting for him to choose. 7. The house doesn't let everyone go. Ethan's pulse thundered in his ears. He had 2 options. Step through the mirror. Open the door. But then the house whispered again. Not everyone gets to leave. Only one of you can. Ethan froze. One of who? 8. The other. Ethan. A sound. Behind him. A footstep. Slow. Deliberate. He turned and saw himself. Not a reflection. Not a shadow. A perfect copy. Standing in the left room. Watching. Waiting. You don't get to go. Ethan's blood ran cold. 9. The fight to leave. His other self stepped forward. The house only lets one of us go. Ethan staggered back. This wasn't happening. This wasn't real. But the house didn't care. The walls shook. The whispering grew louder. Choose. And then his double lunged. X. The house that watches it all. Ethan fought. Scratched. Kicked. Clawed. But his other self was just as strong. Because it was him. And as they struggled, the door started to close. The house was deciding. Only one of them would leave. And as Ethan desperately reached for the exit, his double smiled. And whispered, "See you next time." And then the house chose. The door slammed shut. And everything went dark. Episode 11, The House Remembers Everyone. The house that knew their names. Ethan had survived. He didn't know how. But he was still here. And now, the house was different. Not quieter. Not safer. Just, watching. Like it was waiting for something. Something new. To the names in the walls. It started with a whisper. Not just one voice. Dozens. Soft. Calling. Whispering names. At first, Ethan thought they were random. Until one morning, he woke up and saw the walls. The names were written there. Scratched into the wood. Hundreds of them. Some old. Some fresh. And at the very bottom his own name. 3. The names that disappear. Ethan tried to erase them. Scraped at the wood. Tore at the wallpaper. But no matter what he did, the names stayed. And then, one night, a name vanished. Gone. Like it had never been there. And from somewhere deep inside the house a door creaked open. For the people who were here before, Ethan followed the sound. Down the hallway. To the attic. A place he never remembered entering before. Inside, dust. Cobwebs. And a mirror. Old. Tall. Covered in handprints. And when he wiped the dust away, he saw them. The others. Dozens of people. Standing behind him in the reflection. Watching. Waiting. And then a whisper. "We were just like you." The house doesn't forget. Ethan turned. But the room was empty. The people were only in the glass. Trapped. But still aware. One of them stepped forward. A woman, pale, hollow-eyed. She opened her mouth and Ethan heard his own voice. "You took my place." Ethan's breath caught. The whisper grew louder. "The house remembers. The house always remembers." And then the mirror cracked. 6. The room that was never empty. Ethan stumbled back. His pulse thundered in his ears. But the attic was changing. The walls pulsed. The dust vanished. And suddenly it wasn't an attic anymore. It was a bedroom. Furnished. Lived in. Like someone had been staying here all along. And then the closet door creaked open. 7. The house doesn't let them leave inside the closet a single chair. Old. Wooden. And sitting on it a man. Motionless. A skeleton wrapped in faded clothes. And clutched in his hand a journal. Ethan's stomach twisted. He knew what was inside. He didn't want to read it. But his hands moved on their own. 8. The journal of the forgotten. The handwriting was shaky. Desperate. The last entry read, "I thought I could leave. I was wrong. The house needs someone. It's hungry. And it never forgets a name." Ethan's hands shook. Because beneath the entry there was one final note. A single sentence. Written in his own handwriting. "You were supposed to take my place." Ethan's pulse froze. He hadn't written that. Had he? 9. The house that chooses the attic groaned. The names on the walls began to vanish. One by one. Until only one name remained. His. And from the mirror the whisper came again. "It's time, Ethan." The house had decided. And then everything went dark. Episode 12, The House Has Been Waiting for You. The house that never forgot his name. Ethan knew now. The house had been waiting for him. Not for weeks. Not for months. For decades. Maybe longer. He wasn't the first. But he would be the last. Because now the house had finally decided. To the room that shouldn't exist. The attic was different now. The walls shifted. The air felt heavier. And in the center of the room a new door. It pulsed. Like it was breathing. Ethan's fingers curled into a fist. He knew what this was. The house's final test. And this time he had no choice. 3. The house opens on its own. He didn't touch the door. He didn't have to. It opened for him. Inside a staircase. Leading downward. Ethan swallowed. Every instinct screamed at him to run. But his feet moved on their own. Step by step. Into the dark. For the basement that wasn't always there. The stairs went too deep. Deeper than they should. Like the house had been hiding something. At the bottom a room. No windows. No doors. Only a single chair. And sitting in it a man. The stranger who knew his face. Ethan's breath caught. Because the man looked exactly like him. Older. Worn. Eyes hollow. Like he had been waiting. For years. Maybe forever. And then the man spoke. I was you once. 6. The house only needs one. Ethan's skin crawled. No. This isn't real. The man smiled. Not cruel. Not angry. Just tired. It's always been real. The house always needs someone. And now it's your turn. Ethan stepped back. But the door was gone. 7. The house that swallows people whole. The man rose from the chair. His movements were slow. Like he was heavy. Like the house had been pulling him down. I tried to fight it too. It doesn't matter. One of us has to stay. Ethan's heart pounded. And what happens if I don't? The man's eyes darkened. Then the house will take something worse. 8. The choice that was never his. Ethan turned in circles. Looking for a way out. But the walls shifted around him. The ceiling lowered. And the house breathed again. The man took another step. I don't want this either. But the house won't let us both go. Ethan's hands shook. This wasn't a fight. It was a replacement. One stays. One leaves. The rules had never changed. 9. The moment the house decides. The walls shivered. The whispers rose. A low, deep voice echoed through the room. The house was speaking now. Choose. Ethan's breath came in shallow gasps. His double stood still. Waiting. And Ethan knew. He had two options. Stay, and let the other walk free. Run, and never know what the house would take instead. His heart pounded. He opened his mouth, but the house had already chosen. The house never lets go. The floor split open. Darkness swallowed the room. Ethan screamed. He grabbed for the chair. For anything. But the house pulled him under. And in the last moment before the dark took him, he saw his double smiling. Walking back upstairs. Stepping into his life. And as the door slammed shut above him, Ethan finally understood. The house never lets go. It just chooses who stays. And this time it had chosen him. Episode 13, The house was never empty. The house that breathes in the dark. Ethan wasn't dead. But he wasn't alive, either. The darkness swallowed him whole. Heavy. Suffocating. And yet the house was still breathing. Slow. Deep. Like it was alive. Like it had been waiting for him. To the place beneath the house. The fall should have killed him. But instead, he landed somewhere else. Not the basement. Not any room he had seen before. The air was thick with dust. The walls were made of stone. And in the silence he heard footsteps. Not his. 3. The house was never empty. Something moved in the dark. Not fast. Not hiding. Just, waiting. Ethan stayed still. Held his breath. And then, in the shadows he saw them. The others. Dozens. Maybe more. Standing in the dark. Watching. And then, one of them whispered, "You took my place." For the house keeps them all. Ethan stepped back. The figures didn't move. But their eyes followed him. Some were rotting. Some were fresh. And some looked just like him. Like versions of himself that had been here before. And then the whisper came again. "We were you once. And now you are us." Ethan's stomach turned to ice. The house never lets its echoes go. The shadows shifted. And suddenly the walls were closer. The space was shrinking. And Ethan realized the house wasn't just trapping them. It was absorbing them. Piece by piece. Until they became nothing but whispers. Until they became the house itself. And now it was his turn. 6. The house shows him the end. Ethan turned, searching for a way out. But there was only one thing left. A mirror. sitting in the center of the room. And when he looked inside, he didn't see himself. He saw his double. Upstairs. Living his life. Leaving the house. Smiling. Like Ethan had never existed. Like the house had always planned this. And then a hand reached out of the glass. 7. The reflection that pulls you in. Ethan tried to run. Tried to fight. But the mirror wouldn't let him. It pulled. Dragged. Tearing him out of time. Out of memory. Out of existence. And as the whispers screamed around him, the last thing he saw was his own face. Smiling. Stepping into his life. Taking his place. And then everything went dark. Episode 14, The house was here before you. The house that exists in every shadow. Ethan had been erased. His double was living his life. And he was trapped in the dark. No time. No body. Only the whispers. And they were getting louder. To the house that breathes through the walls, the dark wasn't empty. It was alive. Pulsing. Moving. Ethan wasn't alone. The others were here too. The ones who came before him. The ones the house had taken. And they were waiting for him to join them. 3. The house that was here before you. Ethan tried to fight. Tried to hold on to himself. But the dark wasn't just a place. It was a memory. A voice, ancient and deep, whispered through the black. This house existed before you. Before the first brick was laid. Before the first person walked inside. It was always here. Ethan's stomach twisted. Because now he understood. For the house was never built, it was found. The walls shifted. Revealing something beneath the surface. Old. Buried. Not wood. Not stone. Flesh. Pale. Veined. The house wasn't just a house. It was alive. And it had been feeding for centuries. The room that devours the lost. The dark split open. A doorway appeared. Not a way out. A way deeper. And in the center of it a table. Long covered in names. Scratched into the surface. Hundreds of them. Some fresh. Some centuries old. And at the very bottom his name. Already carved. Waiting for him to sign. 6. The house offers a deal. A figure stepped from the dark. Not a ghost. Not a shadow. Something worse. It smiled. You don't have to disappear. You can stay. You can be part of something bigger. Ethan's throat was dry. His voice cracked. What does that mean? The figure's smile widened. Become the house. 7. The house never runs out of hunger. Ethan's chest tightened. The walls breathed. The whispers surged around him. It's not so bad. You'll never be alone. You'll always have a purpose. And Ethan realized that's why the others hadn't left. They had all given in. And now they were part of the house itself. 8. The choice that was never a choice. Ethan looked at his name. Carved into the wood. The house was offering him an escape. Not freedom. Not life. Just a different kind of existence. And if he refused, it would keep taking. Taking pieces of him. Until he wasn't Ethan anymore. Just a voice in the walls. A whisper in the vents. Another name waiting to be replaced. 9. The house that finally wins. His fingers trembled. He picked up the knife. Carved the final letter into the table. The walls shuddered. The darkness shifted. And then the house sighed. Satisfied. And Ethan finally understood. He hadn't survived. He had been consumed. And now, forever he was part of the house. Episode 15, The house is now inside you. The house that became him. Ethan wasn't human anymore. Not fully. Not since he signed his name. Not since the house took him in. He could still think. Still remember. But now, when he breathed, the house breathed with him. And when he closed his eyes, he saw through its walls. To the house that shared its side it started slowly. Shadows moving at the edge of his vision. Not outside. Inside him. He would blink and see hallways that weren't his own. Rooms that had been forgotten for decades. The faces of people who had once lived here. And the ones who had never left. Now they whispered directly to him. You see now, don't you? The house was never just a house. And now, neither are you. 3. The house that lives in you. Ethan tried to ignore it. Tried to fight it. But every night, the house showed him more. Not just its past. Its future. A family would move in soon. A couple with a child. And the house was hungry again. Ethan's stomach twisted. He tried to scream, but his voice was now part of the walls. For the house that makes you choose. The whispers grew louder. The house wasn't just showing him. It was asking him. Should we let them leave? Or will they stay, like you did? Ethan shook his head. No. They don't deserve this. The whispers chuckled. Neither did you. And yet, here you are. And then the walls shifted. A new door appeared. Waiting for him to step through. Be the house that shows you its heart. Ethan moved toward the door. The whispers followed him. The deeper he went, the more he understood. This wasn't a house. It had never been. It was something older. Something that needed to feed. And now, he was part of it. A piece of the machine. The heart of the house. And if he wanted to, he could control it. 6. The house lets him decide. Ethan stood at the center of everything. The whispers waited. The walls shivered. Say the word. Let them in. Let the cycle continue. But Ethan didn't answer. Because he had one last choice to make. Not for the house. For himself. 7. The house that needs a sacrifice. Ethan looked around. This place had never lost before. It had never been stopped. But maybe it could be. Maybe, just once, it could starve. If he did something no one had done before. If he refused to let it feed. 8. The house tries to keep him. The whispers turned sharp. They hissed. The house shook. The walls split open. You think you can break this? You think you can win? The shadows closed in. Wrapping around him. Trying to pull him deeper. But Ethan didn't fight. He let go. Not of himself. Of the house. 9. The house that finally crumbles for the first time in centuries. Something changed. The whispers screamed. The walls began to break. And then the house began to die. Ethan felt it. The weight. The hunger. The centuries of trapped voices. And in that final moment the house did something it had never done before. It let go. The house that will never take another. Ethan gasped. The air rushed back into his lungs. He was outside. For the first time in forever. The house stood behind him. Old. Crumbling. Rotting from the inside out. And then it collapsed. Silent. Forever. And Ethan was finally free. Episode 16, The house left a door open. The house should be gone. Ethan had escaped. He had watched the house collapse. Turn to dust. Be swallowed by the ground. But deep down he knew. It wasn't over. Because the house was never just walls and wood. It was something older. And things like that don't die so easily. To the door that shouldn't exist. For the first time in years, Ethan was home. Not trapped. Not haunted. Just home. And yet, every night he dreamed of doors. Of rooms that didn't belong to his apartment. Hallways that stretched too far. And shadows that knew his name. Until one night, at 3:17 a.m. he woke up. And saw it. A door. Standing in the middle of his bedroom. Waiting. 3. The house never lets go. Ethan's breath hitched. This wasn't real. It couldn't be. But when he reached for the handle, the wood was solid. Warm. Like something alive. A whisper curled from the keyhole. You didn't close us properly. Ethan's stomach twisted. Because he knew the house had left itself a way back in. For the room that shouldn't exist, he should have run. But Ethan had learned something about the house. Ignoring it doesn't make it leave. So, with a deep breath, he stepped inside. And the world shifted. It wasn't his apartment anymore. It was a perfect replica of his childhood home. But something was off. The furniture was rotting. The windows were too dark. And in the living room a shadow stood by the fireplace. Waiting. Smiling. Ethan's pulse pounded. Because the shadow was himself. The reflection that doesn't need a mirror. Ethan's double tilted its head. You thought you won. You didn't. Ethan stepped back. The house is gone. His double chuckled. Is it? The walls groaned. The floor shook. And then from behind him, a new whisper. It was never just one house. 6. The house is everywhere. The walls peeled back. Revealing more doors. Hundreds of them. Each one leading to another house. Another trapped soul. Ethan's stomach dropped. He hadn't ended it. He had just escaped one of them. The house wasn't a place. It was a network. A chain of endless copies. And now it wanted him back. 7. The house tries to reclaim its own. The doors began to open. Figures stepped out. Men. Women. Children. All with the same hollow eyes. All just like him. And one by one they whispered. Come home, Ethan. You belong with us. The walls closed in. And Ethan ran. 8. The last open door. Ethan fought his way through the house. Pushed past shadows. Dodged hands that reached from the walls. He needed to find a real exit. A door that didn't lead to another trap. And then he saw it. A door, slightly ajar. Not like the others. This one led outside. Or at least he prayed it did. 9. The house makes its final move. The walls howled. The air turned to ice. And his double appeared beside him. Running. Trying to reach the door first. If you leave, another takes your place. Ethan's blood turned cold. Because he saw the truth. If he left, someone else would be dragged in. The house would just replace him. And this cycle would never stop. Unless he broke it himself. The house finally closes its doors. Ethan stopped. Turned to face his double. I won't let you take someone else. The walls trembled. The whispers screamed. The house knew what he was about to do. Ethan took a deep breath. Stepped toward the last door and slammed it shut. The house roared. The walls collapsed. And for the first time in its existence, the house was finally sealed. No more doors. No more traps. And Ethan was finally free. Episode 17, The house left something behind. The house is gone, but not forgotten. Ethan had won. Or at least that's what he told himself. The house was gone. The doors were sealed. And yet, something wasn't right. Because every night he could still hear it. A soft, distant breathing. Not in the walls. Not in the air. Inside him. To the nightmares that aren't dreams. It started with the dreams. But they weren't dreams. They were memories. Memories of places he had never been. Of houses he had never entered. Yet, in every vision he walked through them like he belonged. Like he had lived there for years. Like he was still inside the house. 3. The voices that follow you home. Ethan tried to ignore them. tried to convince himself it was just his mind adjusting. But then the voices came back. Not whispers. Not echoes. Real voices. Soft. Familiar. Speaking just behind his ear. It's not over, Ethan. The house was never just a place. It was part of you all along. For the house finds a new way in. He checked his apartment. Every door. Every window. Nothing was wrong. Until he looked at the mirror. At first, it was just his reflection. But then it blinked. And he didn't. The reflection that isn't you. Ethan froze. His heart slammed against his ribs. His reflection was smiling. And then it whispered. You can't run from what you are. The glass shivered. And for the briefest second he saw something behind him. Tall. Hollow-eyed. Watching. Waiting. And then the mirror shattered. 6. The house never really dies. Ethan's hands shook. The pieces of glass spread across the floor. But in every shard the reflection remained. Hundreds of tiny versions of himself. All staring up at him. All whispering the same thing. The house doesn't need walls anymore. It's inside you now. 7. The mark that won't fade. He ran to the bathroom. Turned on the light. Lifted his sleeve. And that's when he saw it. A mark on his arm. Thin. Black. A crack just like the ones on the house walls. Spreading. Growing. Like roots. Like the house was taking him apart. From the inside. 8. The house wants him back. The walls of his apartment groaned. Not like a normal house. Not like wood and concrete. Like something waking up. Like the house had found a way back. Ethan's pulse hammered. He had to get out. Had to run. But when he opened the front door it led to the house. 9. The house is inside him, and he is inside it. Ethan stumbled back. This wasn't possible. He had destroyed the house. Sealed its doors. And yet it had rebuilt itself. Not outside. Not in the world. But in him. Because the house had never been a place. It was a hunger. A thing that needed to survive. And now it had made him its new home. The house will never let him go. The whispers grew louder. The walls pulsed. The door behind him locked. And in the reflection of the broken mirror he saw himself. Not standing. Not moving. Just smiling. Like he had been waiting all along. Because now, finally the house didn't need a body of its own. It had his. And Ethan, no matter where he ran, would never be able to leave himself. Episode 18, The House is Awake. The house that became flesh. Ethan wasn't living in the house anymore. He was living as it. Or maybe it was living as him. The line was blurred now. His skin felt wrong. His veins felt hollow. Like they weren't carrying blood anymore, but walls. 2. The house moves when he sleeps. Every time Ethan closed his eyes, he wasn't in his apartment. He was somewhere else. Somewhere familiar. Wooden halls. Twisting corridors. The feeling of 100 unseen eyes watching him. And when he woke up his apartment was different. A door that wasn't there before. A hallway that stretched too long. The furniture rotting overnight. And worst of all, the walls were breathing. 3. The house tries to take control. At first, Ethan fought it. He refused to acknowledge what was happening. But the more he resisted, the more the house pushed back. One night, at 3:17 a.m., he woke up outside his own body. Standing in the corner of his bedroom. Watching himself sleep. His lips moved on their own. A whisper, not his. "Let me in." Ethan snapped back. Gasping. But his hands were already reaching for the walls. Like they belonged to someone else. For the house speaks through him. It got worse. His voice didn't always belong to him. Sometimes, it spoke without his permission. Whispered things he didn't understand. Or worse things he did. We have always been here. We will never be empty again. Ethan is just a shell. Now, the house has a body. His body locked up. His lungs burned. Like something was speaking through him. Not with words. But with the walls themselves. And deep inside his bones he felt it. The house was awakening. The house needs more than him. Ethan knew what was happening. The house had bound itself to him. But it was still hungry. And now it didn't just want him. It wanted more. And then the knocks began. 6. The house calls to others. At first, it was just one person. A stranger. Knocking on his door. A confused look on their face. "Hey, do you live here?" Ethan didn't answer. Didn't breathe. Because behind them the hallway stretched too long. The lights flickered. And he knew the house was trying to let them in. Trying to spread. Trying to consume. 7. The house uses his hands. Ethan locked himself inside. Refused to open the door. But then his own hands betrayed him. Moving without his permission. Twisting the lock. Reaching for the handle. Pulling it open. And outside the world wasn't the same anymore. The sky was too dark. The air smelled old. And down the hallway, at the very end, a door had appeared. Slightly open. Waiting. Like a mouth. Like an invitation. 8. The house is no longer just a place. Ethan ran. Ran until his lungs burned. Until he couldn't see the house anymore. But it didn't matter. Because the house was inside him now. And no matter where he went it would follow. It had no walls anymore. No boundaries. And as he collapsed in a gasping heap, he heard the whispers. "Run as far as you want. We are still here. Because you are here. And now, Ethan. You will never be alone again." And deep inside his chest something stirred. Something not human. Something growing. And finally, Ethan understood. The house wasn't a place anymore. It was a parasite. And it had found a perfect host. Him. Episode 19, The House Wants to Be Free. The house no longer needs walls. Ethan had tried to escape. But now he understood. There was no escape. The house wasn't just a place. It was alive. It had a body. His body. And now it wanted more. To the house that walks. At first, it was small things. His hands moving without him. His voice whispering things he didn't say. Then, the reflections stopped matching him. They moved first. Smiled when he wasn't. And then, one night he woke up somewhere else. Not his apartment. Not even his city. Just standing in the middle of a street. With no memory of how he got there. 3. The house finds a way into the world. Ethan's heartbeat pounded. His body wasn't his anymore. The house was learning. Testing its limits. And the worst part, it was getting stronger. Because now the whispers weren't just inside his head. They were around him. In the air. In the walls of every building he passed. Like the house was spreading. Like it had learned how to move. 4. The house collects pieces. Ethan tried to fight it. Tried to stay awake. But every night, he blacked out. And every morning something was different. A new scar on his skin. A new voice in his head. A memory that wasn't his. And then, one day he looked at his hands. And realized they weren't his anymore. The house can make a new body. Ethan's fingers were wrong. Too long. Too thin. Like they had been stretched. Like the house was remaking him. Bit by bit. And then the hunger started. Not his. The house's. Because it wasn't satisfied with just him anymore. It wanted more bodies. More rooms. More doors to open. 6. The house learns to speak on its own. Ethan's phone rang. An unknown number. He answered. Hello. His own voice answered back. Ethan isn't here anymore. The line went dead. And suddenly the whispers weren't whispers anymore. They were laughing. Like the house had finally figured it out. 7. The house wants more than just him. Ethan's stomach tightened. He wasn't the only one in danger. The house was learning. It had already taken him. Now, it wanted everyone else. And it had found a way to do it. Because for the first time it didn't need to wait for people to come inside. It could come to them. 8. The house grows beyond its walls. Ethan's world cracked. The roads twisted. Buildings stretched too tall. Street lights bent at wrong angles. The house was replacing the city. One street at a time. And the people? They didn't see it. Not yet. But they would. And by then it would be too late. 9. The house has a new name. Ethan fell to his knees. Tried to scream. But his voice wasn't his anymore. It belonged to the house. And then, for the first time, the house spoke. Not in whispers. Not in echoes. But in a single, clear voice. His own voice. From every wall. From every street. We are here. We are hungry. And now, we will never be alone again. Ethan shook. Because this wasn't just a house anymore. It was a city. And soon it would be the world. Episode 20, The House Becomes the World. The house is everywhere. Ethan was no longer alone. Because the house was no longer just a house. It had become something bigger. Something alive. And now it was spreading. Not through walls. Not through doors. But through people. Through him. Through everyone. 2. The house no longer needs a door to enter. Ethan used to think the house needed a physical place. That it needed rooms, hallways, ceilings. But he had been wrong. The house had never been trapped by walls. It had been trapped by awareness. It needed people to see it. To think about it. To fear it. And now it had enough people. Enough minds. Enough open doors. And it was unstoppable. 3. The house is in their dreams. It started with the dreams. Not just Ethan's. Everyone's. People began talking about it. They didn't know why. Didn't know how. But every night, they saw the same place. A house they had never visited. A corridor too long. A mirror that whispered back. And in every dream they heard the same voice. You have always been here. And soon, you will remember. For the house no longer waits. Ethan knew what was happening. It wasn't pulling people in anymore. It was building itself inside them. Like a parasite. Like a memory that never goes away. And once the house had enough minds, it wouldn't just exist in dreams. It would be real. Not in one place. Not in one city. But everywhere. A house as big as the world itself. The house wakes up in others. People started changing. Speaking in whispers. Pausing mid-sentence. Staring at walls that weren't there. And worst of all, they began recognizing him. Strangers. People he had never met. Stopping in the street. Looking at him with hollow smiles. Ethan. We remember now. Welcome home. 6. The house is replacing the world. The streets weren't streets anymore. They stretched too long. The buildings shifted when no one was looking. Windows became mirrors. Mirrors became doors. And one by one the world was turning into rooms. Connected. Endless. Just like the house had always planned. And soon, No one would even remember a world without it. Because there wouldn't be one. 7. The house doesn't need to hide anymore. Ethan ran. Through the streets. Through hallways that used to be roads. Through cities that used to be real. Everywhere he turned there was another door. Another room. Another hallway leading nowhere. Until he finally stopped. And realized there was nowhere left to run. The world was gone. And all that was left was the house. 8. The house speaks one last time. The walls trembled. The floor pulsed. And then a voice. Not whispered. Not hidden. Loud. Clear. Everywhere. Welcome home, Ethan. Welcome home, everyone. And finally the world became silent. Because now, there was only one thing left. Not streets. Not cities. Not people. Just rooms. Just doors. Just endless hallways. And the sound of breathing. Because now the house had won. And it would never let go.